Good morning and welcome back to the program where we explore the fascinating world of New York City real estate and all the people behind all of it. I would like to welcome my listeners in the United States and all around the world. Today we're going to talk about the high-stakes negotiations in real estate. These are intense and significant discussions between parties involved in buying or selling valuable properties. I'm Vince Rocco. Let's go behind the headlines and get to the real story inside everything real estate. This is Talking New York Real Estate. Let's do it. At this hour, the stakes are high due to the substantial sums of money at play, intricate property, features, and the desire for exclusivity. Key elements include meticulous market research, establishing clear objectives, and building strong relationships, as the dynamics often involve personal connections and privacy concerns. Understanding the motivations, always, of the parties involved, practicing discretion, and exploring creative solutions beyond price adjustments are integral parts of the successful negotiations. We will have all that and so much more as Talking New York Real Estate gets underway on this very busy Tuesday morning. And in the news this morning, deals in New York City in the sales market plunged in 2023 as a result of high mortgage rates that turned off buyers and sellers alike. Even buyers who didn't need financing were left high and dry because of very low inventory. The problem in a nutshell: sellers were sitting on mortgage rates as low as 3% and were reluctant to buy again if it meant paying 7 or even 8%. Mortgage rates have edged down recently in the last few weeks. In fact, in December, the 30-year fixed mortgage rate fell below 7%. That for the first time since August, just as the Fed Reserve signaled that it expects to make 3 interest rate cuts this year and more next, which will lower the cost of borrowing further. Those cuts are expected to bring buyers back into the sales market this year and get the momentum moving again in both the sales and also the rental markets. And all cash transactions represented a large percentage of Manhattan deals in the fourth quarter of 2023. Reflecting the impact of still high mortgage rates, they accounted for 68% of total Manhattan sales, an all-time record according to the latest edition of the Elliman Report. That's up significantly from the third quarter when all cash deals were 57% of transactions, the third highest in history. Cash deals usually represent about 50% of all transactions here in Manhattan, according to Jonathan Miller, the president and CEO of the appraisal firm Miller Samuel and the author of the report. And City Bike, is hiking its prices this month. The popular bike-sharing service operated by Lyft is rolling out its new pricing system in phases starting in January, with the price of an annual membership jumping from $205 to $220 a year starting January 29th. And nearly 250 chain stores in New York City have closed in the last year, the second largest decrease since the pandemic began in 2020. The Center for Urban Future last week released its annual State of the Chains report, which found a 3.1% decrease in the number of chain stores across the 5 boroughs over the past year. This year's decline breaks a 2-year streak of moderate growth of New York City chain stores. And finally, New York City is seeking artists to help beautify sections of unattracted sidewalk sheds and construction fencing throughout the 5 boroughs. The city's Department of Cultural Affairs has issued an open call for artists for 2024 through 2025 as part of its City Canvas program, which installs temporary, large-scale artwork on protective structures to make them more visually appealing. And we'll have more on that as it comes in. An exciting day today. With me today are Eirik Gislason from Brown Harris Stevens, Jared Antin from Ellegren Forbes Global Properties, Anna Shagalov, Brown Harris Stevens, and Jordan Shea from Douglas Elliman. All right, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome to 2024. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all. First time back in a couple of weeks, so I'm excited to be here today. Eirik, I want to start with you. We're going to talk about negotiations today and negotiating, high-end negotiations in the luxury market, although negotiations in any market in our price points. We negotiate in our personal life as well as negotiate in business. So, Eirik, I want to start with you. In one of your last online discussions about collaborative negotiations, in the current market, you discussed the concept of strategy, empathy, and how to use it effectively in your negotiations. Okay, that phrase kind of got me. Mm-hmm. Tell us about negotiating that way in this luxury market that we want to talk about today.
Yeah, the idea
and what it means.
Yeah, the concept of strategic empathy is it's our desire to understand the interests, motives, and constraints of our counterpart. And so how we tie that into collaborative negotiation is to say that to effectively anticipate and respond to our counterpart's actions, we need to have a deep or clear understanding of their intentions, their motives, and their constraints. And that then ties into what tactics we use. So then the tactic there to tie into strategic empathy is tactical empathy. And that deals with the idea of listening with empathy and hearing the other person. And what we know is that when people feel heard, that's disarming. When someone feels heard, it disarms them and it creates a space for safety and trust. And in that space is when you're most effective, you're most influential and persuasive. So ultimately, what we're trying to do is really truly understand what our counterpart, whether that's our client in a negotiation with our client or with the other side of the deal, we want to understand what they really want, what they really need, not what they say they want and need. And that's where strategic empathy kind of
Isn't that the basis of every healthy relationship, just in general?
Yeah.
I mean,
You would
I think
hope
that's
so.
Nail on the head there.
Yeah.
But see, my concern there is, and not that I don't agree with you, because I agree with you 100%. In my mind, I'm thinking about real estate agents, okay? When you talk about listening, problem. When you talk about being empathetic, problem.
Yeah.
When you talk about being sensitive, problem, because for the most part, it's all about them, right? So how do you get them to be more empathetic or to be more sensitive and to really listen? Look, just in general, raising kids, talking to other adults. You know, I've always said, and I've said it on this program many times, I don't learn anything by talking too much, okay? Outside of being a talk show host here. But I learn by listening.
Right.
Okay? So how do you get agents to understand that concept when negotiations may not work for them and they can't understand why?
Well, a lot of times in my experience in coaching and in practice, a lot of times the response from another agent, their reluctance to negotiate is based on their fear that they are going to give up too much, that they're going to share too much, or that they're going to give away power.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole idea of tactical empathy, is to say, I want to create a space where they feel that there's trust and safety, so that they're willing to share the things that they believe are necessary to get to a deal. Right, and so that's really a lot of times where the roadblock happens, is we just butt heads with the other side. We don't ask questions in a strategic way, and we'll talk about that idea of ceaseless curiosity, I'm sure. But we don't ask a lot of questions. We shut down. We see that wall come up on the other side, and we immediately say, "Well, they're not going to tell me what I need to know, so I'm going to go elsewhere and find that out," as opposed to saying, how can I create a place where this person thinks it's in their interest to give me the information I need in order to get a deal together here? Because ultimately they want a deal too.
And just to piggyback on that, I mean, Vince, you said, agents have a reputation for being self-interested, talk too much, and all of that. And that's exactly the wrong way to approach a negotiation, right?
Absolutely.
Whether you're talking with your own client or the other side, no one cares what you want. What you want has no place in the negotiation. So let's start with that, front and foremost. So
Well said.
most of the bad habits start, as Eirik said, because you're focused on what you want or what your goals are, and you have to remove all that. Understanding what your client wants, and then being able to really understand how to get them in that way. Your job is not to convince them of something, because you're never going to be able to convince someone to do something in this business. And if you are, they're going to come back and resent you for it one way or another, or they're going to hold you accountable for mistakes that are really of no fault of yours, right? Yeah. In this business, it's all about being able to be that advisor. What does an advisor do? As Eirik said, they ask the right questions and they help you see. They paint the vision. They approach you with that empathy, which is really at the root of it all, because at the end of the day, real estate is an emotional process. Fact, logic, reason, all of that goes out the window when it's all about, how does this home make me feel? What is it going to feel to sell this? What am I gaining? What am I losing? And, loss is so much more powerful than gain in terms of an emotion. There was a stat, right, that people need to gain twice as much as what they lose to feel equal. So think about that for a minute.
That's right.
I want to key on the word he yeah, really. But
loss aversion is a real thing.
Jared used the word trust, okay?
Yeah.
And I think trust in anything we do in life, personally or professionally, if you don't establish that level of trust, you're not going to be able to negotiate properly. You're not going to be able to understand maybe the needs of your client. They're not going to understand you because they feel like, who are you?
Yeah.
Right? We're advisors, as he said, but we're also hopefully trusted advisors. How do we get to that point of being trusted advisors in this business of real estate that we all play in?
Well, I mean, to use Stephen M. R. Covey's example of it in The Speed of Trust, he talks about the 4 cores of credibility and the 2 dimensions of trust. And I think that he breaks it down in such a great way. He talks about character and competency. So character is that's the static, right? That's who you are. It's your motives, your agenda. It's what you're bringing to the table as a person. That's important. And so in building trust with a client or a counterpart, with your own client when you're negotiating with them or with the other side of the deal, understanding that character matters and understanding that your motivation matters is one thing. And then there's the competency piece. It's that idea of your expertise, results that you've achieved, and helping the other person understand that you have a high level of competency. And that works especially well with your client. Oftentimes we skip that step and we go you either go right into this is what I've achieved and this is why you should trust me, as opposed to helping that client get to that point of trust by understanding those 2 dimensions. So I think it's everything to build trust first. It matters so much, especially in the luxury market when you've got people who are guarded. As you said in the intro, they're guarded with their personal information. They're guarded with other privacy concerns that aren't financial. And so for them to let you in and give you the information, to not be guarded, to not mask their real intentions, their real motives, their real constraints, they have to trust you. There's no way around it.
And competence is a part of that trust, and I completely agree with you. Anna?
So many of us in this business, I mean, the longer you've been in it especially, are fortunate enough to have a lot of our, if not all of our business referred, 99%. So the trust aspect of it kind of comes with that referral, and it makes it even more important to understand the premise of what it means to be trusted, because so many take that for granted and lose that trust. So when you're given that with the client because of the referral, holding on to it and kind of rising even higher to make sure that, number one, you make the referral agent or person look great. You want them to, the person to go back to them and say, wow, you just paired me with the best person. Yeah. But to hold that level of trust in your hand, you've already gotten it. So it's like you get this baby and you got to nurture it and you got to cradle it and you got to make sure it
kind of don't screw
grows.
it up.
Don't screw it up.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, that's very true. How important though is having a good rapport with your clients when it comes to negotiation at some point? I guess in our business we can say we negotiate from the minute we wake up in the morning to the minute we go to sleep at night. Everything is a negotiation. Trying to get an appointment with another agent to show an apartment, okay? Going in, with a client. It's all negotiations. How important is rapport? As Anna said, we get referrals, okay? Most of our business is from referrals, which sets up a good, I would say, trusted situation, because if you did well with somebody and they refer you, that means, hey, Vince did a good job, work with him, and I'm sure he'll do a great job for you. But you've got to have that rapport, and we don't always relate to everybody that we need to work with, right? How do we do that? Because I find, when I was managing agents, a bunch of years ago, I find that was one of the struggles that agents had when they come to me and say, I just can't get along with this person, for whatever their reasons were, right?
Just to simplify it, mirroring. Just you're there for them, and if you can't relate to who they are, that's fine, but you kind of have to not become them, but you just have to mirror their energy somewhat, or heighten the energy, but mirror their stance. I mean, I'm very upbeat and high energy when I'm out with people, and if I'm with somebody that's really reserved, I'm not going to be talking their ear off the whole time. Or cracking. I might crack some jokes, but I'm going to try to make it fun and be true to me. But
Right.
at the same time, I want to respect who they are and kind of take their lead as to how they want the process to go.
The most dynamic salespeople are only going to be able to really relate with 75% of the people. So there's automatically a void, but there are certainly strategies that you can deploy. But having that rapport and having the comfortability, which again is all based upon trust. When you get a referral, it is a lot easier to start that conversation and build a rapport because there's a certain level of you already being quote unquote the chosen one, right? Or the favorite in that. And you don't have to now sell yourself from like, hey, this is who I am and this is what I can do. You can show it. But having that rapport is an important foundation to be able to have what is inevitably going to be a series of difficult conversations. Something went wrong. They didn't accept your offer. You have to reduce the price. And it's all about being able to call that out up front. And a lot of agents, similar in the negotiation piece, they want to delay, hide, obfuscate, avoid that conversation because they think it's just going to go away. But at the end of the day, by hiding, by not tackling it head on, you're not going to solve anything. If you approach it head on, best case, the situation doesn't exist. And, they said, well, thank you for, making me aware and opening my eyes. And best case, you've been able to navigate around it and they appreciate your transparency. So these are all different things that agents can do that allow them to create that rapport, create that trust. So none of it is just automatically there. It's earned. It's not given.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the co-brokerage community because, we negotiate with everybody, as I said before, and everything is a negotiation. And oftentimes, we're all agents and we've all been out there for many, many years. Oftentimes you run up against a co-broker who is not easy to deal with. So aside from, negotiating with your own customers, buyers and sellers, you've got to navigate and deal with a co-broker who, again, could sometimes be difficult and sometimes be a breeze, okay? How do we do that? Jordan, what is the biggest, problem in dealing with a very difficult, and I'll use the word difficult, agent on the other side?
I think that as in any industry, across the board, there are people that you do work well with and people that you don't work well with. And it's not uncommon to have somebody, as you said, that's a bit difficult. But again, I think it comes down to what we're really talking about when we discussed empathy and et cetera, et cetera. What does that person want most? They want to get a deal done. So at the end of the day, there might be a broker that I really don't like showing their properties. I really don't like dealing with them. I avoid them at all costs. But it's in my best interest to get a deal done, and it's in their best interest to get a deal done. And professionalism is setting aside your personal feelings in order to see something through. And it's learning about how to communicate in a manner which they will respond to, right? And also leaving offense, and by offense, I mean the thin-skinned nature that we all sort of have, leaving that at the door. People are who they are. And frankly, I would rather deal with someone that is a notorious asshole, if you will. Pardon my language.
I was going to say jackass.
Jackass, sure.
Donkey.
There are a lot of those.
I'd rather deal with someone who has a horrible reputation that I can see coming than someone that I can't. Because at least I'm prepared.
Yeah.
It's very interesting you say that because I just did a rental deal last week or the week before, and the listing agent was seemingly a nice person right up front. Never worked with him before, but, whatever. My client liked the apartment. We took the apartment, whatever. And I kind of suspected, and I said to my client, we're going to have a little bit of an issue here. And she's like, well, what are you talking about? Well, he seems like he's more of a transactional agent than he is a personal agent. He's not going to care about you. He certainly doesn't care about me. And as it turned out, he was just that. Very transactional. Once the lease was signed, he disappeared, didn't want to know anything. We had questions about painting the apartment, about cleaning the floor, on and on and on. No response, no response, no response.
Worse.
Gone. Still gone. I mean, he's around, but still not responding to anything. And these are the times when I say, no matter how you want to be nice and how you want to negotiate in all good faith for whoever you're working with, a renter, a buyer, a seller, it's oftentimes difficult, and it tries our patience. I mean, I can turn around and say, oh, yell and scream at him. That's not my style, so I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to take it in and feel bad about that and feel bad that my client is not really getting what she's looking for or actually what she deserves. So the negotiation there was almost zero because he wouldn't even respond.
Right. I will say the other side of that is, to your credit, Vince, we say in negotiation you have to take a moment to size up your counterpart and see
Right.
what style they're bringing to the table. Who are they? This is a G. Richard Shell quote. So who are they? And you did that. So you said, okay, I believe, it seems to me, I'm labeling this person, right? It seems to me that they are this type.
Yeah.
You're bringing that information to your client. Now you're developing a strategy to win that involves and incorporates this knowledge about the other side. And that's what you did. So, you may know, okay, they're not going to, once the ink is on the paper, they are going to be gone. So how do we negotiate in advance of signing of the lease to make sure that we protect ourselves or get what we need so that they're not lingering issues beyond the lease signing that we know are probably not going to be taken care of by this person. And so when you identify that and then bring that to your client, you are in the middle of a negotiation and you're anticipating the issues that are going to arise.
And allowing your client to anticipate
Exactly.
the struggles that may come because of it, and kind of taking the ownership not away from you because you're always going to be tied to that client, but managing their expectations as to there's only so much that you can do.
All right, we have to take a break. We have so much more on this topic coming up. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody, we're back. I really like this one here because we're going to talk about kids a little bit, okay? Eric, you said in one of your blogs a while ago, remember the show, Are You Smarter Than a Fifth Grader? Okay? Or the book. All I really need to know, I learned in kindergarten, okay? Well, add negotiation skill and prowess to the list of things you can learn from our children. There are several factors that make children such formidable negotiators, okay? And why growing up tends to diminish the tools needed to get the best negotiation outcomes. Ceaseless curiosity, also known as why? We've all grown up with nieces and nephews and children. Because I said so. It just is what it is. I mean, my parents, on a plaque, because I said so.
That does not fly anymore.
It doesn't fly anymore, okay? So explain that for us, because it's a fact. With people who have kids, people who have, older kids, being a kid in my youth and growing up and remembering what my parents used to say, why? Don't talk because I said so.
Right. And that's, many studies have shown that as we get older, we become less curious. We ask less questions throughout the day, right? And so that the idea of, and what that ties into is outcomes, which I'll talk about in a second, but the idea of ceaseless curiosity is having a genuine interest in the information you're trying to gain and finding different ways to get that information. And kids have this natural ability to do this. They'll hit you with closed-ended questions and open-ended questions. They'll bring in data while you let her have another snack or you let him have another snack. You didn't say no yesterday,
Why can
right?
he do it and I can't?
Right. So they'll ask. So they'll find different ways to get the information they want, or to just, as the child tactic is designed to do, to break you down so that you just say fine. Right. And that's what ceaseless curiosity is, and really what it's tied to is, as we get older, we start to, through experience, through fear, through biases, we start to determine the outcome of what we're asking or what we're trying to achieve before we even ask the question. And once we do that, we then start to tell ourselves, is it worth even asking the question? Because I believe I already know what the response is going to be. And kids don't do that. They're not tied to the outcome. They just keep asking because they're more interested in what they can achieve than how they feel if they don't get it.
But when they get the answer that they want, and maybe you can answer this question, when they get the answer that they want, do they feel like they've accomplished something, that they've won in the negotiation, or is it still kind of like they're young, they really don't know yet, they just push?
They know.
Well, I bet my son a Lego set yesterday, and when I walked home, he was very quick to tell me that he won and I was wrong. So I owe my son a Lego set now.
It's on tape.
It's on tape.
Right, he'll watch it next week.
But the questions are such an important thing, and in adulthood, right, we fall into a comfortable pattern, and one in which we much prefer to talk than to ask. But in sales, in negotiation, really in life, you will advance yourself and get further by asking questions, right? And no is a more comfortable response than yes as just a natural place, right? So it's important that we, as good advisors, also shift the questions we're going to ask to get the answer that we want and that is more comfortable for someone to give. So, for instance, instead of would you like to put in an offer, are you opposed to put in an offer? Remember, it's non-binding, right? They're going to say, no, I'm not opposed, and it moves it forward, right? Or would you oppose to being, going and seeing this apartment again? So being able to flip the way that you ask questions also plays to that human nature. I mean, psychology is everything in all of this negotiation, right? Everything that we've all been talking about.
That word no is interesting, though, because when you get like a one-word response, whether you're in a negotiation or just in conversation, no. Sometimes I sit back and think, all right, so where do I go from there?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you do
wall,
with no?
At that point, the wall is built, and you need to shatter it. You need to have the understanding and wherewithal of how to get to that next step.
Yeah.
And even with the kids, there is no. Especially nowadays, there's so much information. I'm going to the kid thing for a second. There's so much information on how to effectively talk to your children. And whereas like when our parents raised us, or at least me, there was none of that. It's just, I said this, don't question it, be quiet, that's it. So now...
That's where I learned it is what it is.
It is what it is, right? But now it is not what it is. It's not what we want it to be. And there's so much of that, as Eirik, you're talking about, all of these negotiation tactics, and of course I'm attributing it to the career and the work, but man, it's all there when you're talking to your kids as well. So the practice that you get can also be at home with them. And if you have the understanding of kind of taking that information and working with it into your professional life, you are so far ahead of the curve.
100%.
So true.
Yeah.
It's very true. So let's talk about goals and priorities, okay? So how do you define your goals and priorities before you enter negotiations, okay? Because a little bit is about you, a little bit is about the client, a little bit is about whether it's a buyer, a seller, or a renter. Whether it's price, closing timeline, or specific property features, having a clear understanding of our own objectives helps in the negotiation process, I think, right? How does it?
So...
No, go ahead.
It's important to have that conversation with the person you're representing and truly understand, okay, if this, then that, right? What is your best case scenario? What's your compromise scenario? Come up with those 3 scenarios, best, worst, middle case. Write them down. You have to be able to point to that because when you go through the negotiation process, you have to be able to point them back and say, well, you said this, that, and the other thing. Hey, if we got this, rank your priorities. So, hey, is price, is them accepting your contingency, is, the closing date, like what is the most important thing? And if you can have it pinned down, that gives you all the ammunition, not to tell them something, but just to remind them what they already told you and to pin back to it.
But as I mentioned before with this rental agent that I was dealing with, well, he's a sales agent, but he was doing a rental, whatever. His goals were unknown, okay? So very difficult for us to negotiate with him because I really didn't know where he was coming from. Clearly, the result was he didn't care, right? So he just went off and said, okay, we're done. Lease is signed. Board package is in. Finished. Okay, so what kind of goal did he have or not have, and is that prevalent out there in our marketplace? When you need to understand where you need to come to in a deal, in a negotiation, again, whether it's price, whether it's an offer, whether it's a board package, every element of our transaction is a negotiation from start to finish.
Yeah, so I would say you can take it right back to that strategic empathy question, right? Whether it seems as though he doesn't care, he has interests, he has motives, and he has constraints. He may be transactional, but there are things that he wants. There are things that he needs. which a lot of agents do, we mask them, we make them ambiguous to confuse the other side so they don't know how to rank our value elements. They are purposefully wanting us to not know what is of value to them so that we can't extract value in the transaction. So they make it confusing, they put up that guard, but they still have interests and motives and constraints. The question is, and using strategic empathy, using tactical empathy, how do we get that agent to give us some indication? Can we get some indication from that agent as to what it is that will serve their interests? Is it that he knows that he puts the listing up, he's going to have 12 applications, and he's going to rent that apartment within 2 days? So if that's the case, and he knows that he's in a high power position because he has market power, right? He has competition power. If that's the case, the question then might be to him, we understand that this is going to result in several applications. What would make our application the most palatable to you and your landlord? And then once they uncover those, or once they give you that information, I want to know, what do you want? That's not a hard question for them to ask. I want my client to put the best possible application in front of you. Mm-hmm. How do we do that? And then once you hear that from him, then the question is, what can you exchange to make sure that he is not transactional? To make sure that he is going to be there to answer your phone calls up until and after you sign leases so that your client is taken care of. And that's that exchange that you're hoping for.
In markets like we are in today, questionable, uncertain, I mean, we could use a whole bunch of different, descriptions. How do you explore creative solutions, to anything beyond prices? Do you want to include concessions? Maybe the client wants a piece of furniture. Maybe there's an adjusting of the closing timeline. For example, they can't close right away, but maybe 30 days after the proposed date is a little better. That's also negotiations. That's also a big part of our negotiations. And I always say, even when I'm teaching classes, look, getting to the closing table is always an art. Okay, it's not a science. It's always an art, and it can take moving mountains sometimes to do that. Yeah. How do you get creative in trying to make everyone in the transaction understand that this is in everyone's best interest if we do it this way versus that way? Not easy, right? How do we do that?
Well, in most situations, in most negotiations, or agreeing really to price and terms, there's rarely a stalking horse or another party involved, right? We're not really doing bidding wars so much anymore. Occasionally there might be another party, but then, really you're looking at different terms, different finances, and it's up to the seller, frankly. You can butter up your colleague as much as you want to. You can present a really glowing letter about how yada, 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 this home is perfect and I love everything you did about it. But at the end of the day, it's most likely about terms and conditions, as you said. I think that really, again, and I hate to keep reiterating this, the commonality is that everybody wants to get the deal done, right? Yeah. At the end of the day. And I think most people are operating in this specific market, which is very uncertain, and I'd say there's a lot of fear-based decision-making. Mm-hmm. Most people are operating under a bird in hand is better than two in the bush. And most people, unless you're trying to, white knight this or be an arch villain, most people are going to try to get it done, with you and see your way to it. And there's going to be the give and take. It's just what it is. Mm-hmm.
I think a big part of it, to Erik's point of asking questions, if you ask all of the right questions, or at least when you're getting the tour, listen carefully to what the other agent is alluding to. You can get little tidbits that can sweeten your deal. For example, I had this buyer who was looking at an apartment that was sitting on the market for a long time. The sellers had already moved out of state. The seller's parents were living in the apartment, didn't want them to sell. Mm-hmm. My client had time on her side. Not a problem, but she loved the apartment. So knowing that information, we made an offer based on the parents can stay there for the whole first year and, try to figure out what they needed to do in that time. They didn't need to be kicked out. 3 months for somebody is a very, very, well, for everybody is a short amount of time, to find another living situation. So our number was not really where they wanted, but that particular term was so meaningful to them, and to them so creative. I'm like, how did nobody else, you have to have the right situation on the buy side to be able to do something like that. But it caught their attention. It was creative, and we didn't get the deal done because there was mold issues in the apartment at the end of the day. But it goes to that sweet spot of really listening and really asking a lot of questions.
Well, that's why I said, getting to the closing table is an art, because sometimes in due diligence, the attorneys come up with board minutes and they see all kinds of things. I had the same mold issue, and the client said, whoa, not going to go there. How does researching current market conditions, understanding the markets that we're in, and making sure that our clients understand what the market is about, how does that help or hinder negotiations at all?
Well, I think that anything that's based in sound logic is incredibly important to any negotiation, because sound logic comes in if you talk about the left and right brain. You've got right brain emotional side, left brain logic side, right? And at some point, everyone is going to need to justify that purchase or that decision, and that's where sound logic comes in. And I think that a lot of negotiators make the mistake of not being prepared with logic when their client gets to that moment where they need to have justification, sound logical justification. They're not prepared to give them the information that is true, that is honest, and that is based in fact. And the other part of sound logic that's really important is if you're in a positional bargaining argument. Yes, I will. No, you won't. You're up there and you're fighting stand for stand. What gets you out of that is usually objective, factual, sound logic. That gets you, can we agree on a set of facts? And that gets you to a point where you can start talking about what options you have.
I find sometimes, and I mentioned it in the opening, and Eirik, you mentioned it before, privacy, keeping details quiet, secret, board packages, co-ops and condos. I've said for years, co-ops will want to undress you and know everything there is to know about you and everybody else involved in this transaction. That's just the way it is. Okay, and if you want to proceed forward and you want to buy this co-op, and even a condo, but a co-op, for example, you've got to do what they want you to do, or you're not going to get in there. One of the biggest negotiation obstacles I have oftentimes with a co-op is getting clients, even though you discuss it way up front, and you've got that level of trust, when it comes to financial statements and bank statements and earnings and whatever else, they'll give you a high level whatever, and you say, no, you've got to fill out this financial form, and you've got to provide all the backup to that financial. I'm not doing that. I mean, I don't even know how many times in my 22-year career, 22 years this year, my God, I know her that long. Yeah. But how many times have we gone through this?
Yeah.
Where people say, "Oh, full stop, not going to do that." Well, you have to. You signed a contract. It says you got to, give us that information.
And it's crazy. I'm so sorry to interrupt. It's crazy how much you can prepare them for this and let them know that, Fifth Avenue dwellers have to do it. The 100% down has to do it. The 100% down co-ops have to do it. And you tell them there is no, and I literally say there is no way to prepare you for how onerous this process is. So just keep that in mind. You're going to have to do, and you go through it with them. And then after they sign the contract, they're like, "Wait, what?
Yeah,
you can't.
It's like, did you? I don't remember you telling me that. Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
my
come on now,
God. It's like you need to
confidentiality.
record every conversation you have.
It's hilarious.
I affectionately call it a financial colonoscopy.
Well, there you go.
So I prepare them for it that way. And I'll actually sit down with them and walk them through the board package before we sign
Yeah.
the contract. I want them to understand exactly
Yeah.
what they have
Yeah,
to
I
do.
do
Good point.
We
Very
have
good
a
point.
sales support and an in-house board package
And you
department.
assume they're paying attention.
Right. But we'll have our board package department mark it all up for them and make it clear. But yeah, exactly as Anna said, everyone has to do it. You're not that special, right? So some people that works and others then get really, really even more angry with it.
Well, and I tell them all the time too. Well, if I'm paying all cash, I don't have to do that. Yes, you do.
And
All
it's
cash,
for
you
your
still have to.
protection, right? I mean, that's what we paint is like, look, they need to make sure that you can keep it, carry it, afford it. And hey, you don't want
Correct.
someone else to get in without being properly vetted because you'll pay for that.
You'll
and
pay
then
for that.
And then you'll get, they should Google me.
Yeah. Well, and the reality is that the first thing we need to remember is it's not about us, right? And because when we take offense to the fact that they're taking a stand, and people take stands, why? They take them so that they can protect themselves. And whether they've gotten the information in advance or not, you've told them everything they need to know or not, we do this. We do this as human beings because we feel like if we don't take the stand, that we're going to be moved left and right, and we're just going to be pulled in every direction, and it never ends, right? So we take the stand to protect ourselves, what it really is, if we meet them there and they say, I'm not doing this, and you say, yeah, you are, right? Then all of a sudden we're in a yes/no positional bargaining thing. Whereas if they say, well, I'm not doing this, and we say, okay, let's take a step back for a second and look at what our options are. Our options right now are X, Y, and Z. We have a contract signed in place, right? The only thing that now gets us off this deal is either, if we're financing, a declination from the bank or a declined board package, right? So whether we have an obligation to this part of the process. So let's talk about what our options are. And then by doing that, you can show that you're supporting the client, that you're hearing the client, you're acknowledging their issue with this information that they're about to provide, but then also coming up with a solution that involves what's possible and what's not. And walking away from the deal right now is not an option.
It's also reframing, just pinning back to what Eirik said. It's not about the broker, but it's also not really about the client. Yes, the whole board package is on the client, but it's not about the client. It's about the building, right? So who's this for? It's for the buildings, for the shareholders, it's for all the other people that live in there. And that's important to also try to reframe it that way. Again, it doesn't always work because some people just don't care, but it does help to at least move the perspective.
Some people just don't care. Got to bottle that one. We're coming right back after these messages. Don't go anywhere. Okay, everybody, we're back. And before we get to some market conditions and trends and sentiments, I want to ask Eirik to explain to the audience here, exactly what your negotiation skills classes are online. You have a huge online presence.
Thank you.
And the class where we become, I can't remember the exact, I should have remembered.
Certified negotiator.
Certified negotiator.
Yeah.
Tell us about that, and tell us how, as agents, it helps us in our careers.
Yeah, the two courses, Certified Negotiation Expert and Master Certified Negotiation Expert, are two designations. The CNE course, Certified Negotiation Expert, that's the core concepts course, although it's not, when we say core concepts, it's really, we get deep into buyer psychology, into different styles of negotiation, into competitive and collaborative tactics. And we really define the difference between a competitive negotiator, a collaborative negotiator, and then we give tools on how to strategize and organize your negotiations, how to find those key value elements when you're talking to your client or to the other side. Well, how do they rank them? All of that stuff, minimums, maximums, and goals that Jared talked about. So that's the core concepts class. And then the Master Certified Negotiation Expert class gets a lot deeper into anchoring, into power, into email or written communication, cross-cultural components, and multi-generational factors in negotiation. So that's a deeper dive into kind of higher level negotiation. Neither of those classes are scheduled right now, but keep an eye out for them through REBNY. That's where I teach them. I also teach nationally, so I may be teaching a class outside of REBNY if schedule one of those nationally. And then I do have a tactics course, a 4-hour course, CE for New York licensees. I have a tactics course. It's all about the different negotiation tactics that we use, collaborative, competitive. And that course is through the New York School of Real Estate. That's NYSORE, NYSORE.com. And that's, I think it's like a $20 course or something, maybe $30, but it's 4 hours of continuing education. And I teach that on the 25th of January. And I teach that 3 or 4 times a year.
So that 4 hours would count towards our 22.5 hours that are needed every 2 years?
That's right. Yeah, it is approved for New York State continuing education. It's 4 elective hours. Yeah.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah.
That's all good stuff. So I'm going to play devil's advocate. A typical agent would say, so what's in it for me? Why do I need that? What do I need to do that for? Take time taking another class. I don't want to take another class. What is in it for me?
Well, I mean, as I said the last time I was on your show, Vince, this is not something that people are taught in pre-licensing.
Right.
it is not something that a lot of sales directors, sales managers, although they have the expertise, they don't have time to really get deep into negotiation coursework. They may be able to, transaction by transaction, give tips and tricks and strategies to their agents, but to really understand how this works and why collaborative negotiation is so impactful and important is not something that you find at your agency and is not something you find in pre-licensing. So to take advantage of, whether there's continuing education or credit or not, to take advantage of this information, especially in a market that we're in now, where we really do need to understand, as we were talking prior to going on the show, why are buyers on the sidelines? Why are sellers reluctant to sell? How do I understand that? And how can I have different ways to communicate with my clients to see what it is that they want and how I can help them achieve it? And that is something that is at the heart of negotiation, and it's so incredibly important in our business.
Extremely important.
How many hours is each class?
The CNE and MCE class are 12 and 15 respectively, so those are big courses. The tactics class is it's 10 to 2. It's 3.75 hours of continuing education.
Yeah, that's amazing. Again, we'll chat about that offline. All right, let's we have a few minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about the marketplace, which is my hot button in the last several weeks. Getting everybody who comes here to set to kind of expound upon what's happening out there, why it's happening, if we even know, what does our business look like as we go into 2024. Talking about trends, negotiations obviously are important, as you just said, helping clients even understand what the markets are about. But what are we looking at right now in January, first quarter, the start of first quarter of 2024? What do we look like?
You point at me.
I point at you.
So, well, interestingly, I think there is a bit of an uptick in buyer interest going into January. The rates coming down a smidge, and talk of it, coming down a little bit more. Buyers are starting to come out of hibernation a little bit, and at least asking questions. I have a listing that I've taken off many of my listings waiting for spring market, hoping that that's the rejuvenation they need. I have one listing that I took off market, and now I'm getting calls on it from realtors. So I'm showing it because there are buyers that are showing up. And they're interested, and they kind of want to get ahead of it, because if rates do get to a favorable place, or at least a place where people feel comfortable again, the floodgates can open. I'm not a predictor, but the floodgates can open, and you really want to kind of get ahead of that. So I'm seeing an uptick of positive thinking.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I think, as I've said many times on this show, in New York City, you really can't keep buyers down for very long. We've gone through all kinds of tragedies, and 9/11 and COVID and financial crisis, and people step on the sideline for a bit, and then all of a sudden it's kind of like it gnaws at them, and they've got to jump and start doing things. I'm not so sure it's going to be a very robust return for buyers to the market,
Right,
but
because we need the inventory.
We need the inventory, and we need rates to really start showing their decline. But I do believe that throughout the first half of this year, we're going to start seeing some significant difference. Jared, you write a report for Elegant every week, which of course I never miss reading. Talk a little bit about the Consumer Sentiment Index. It went from -32 to -18, and you're saying that's possibly the impetus to get the buyers off the sofa at home and maybe out there looking around and checking out what may be available should inventory start coming back. Is that going to help?
Yeah, so importantly, buyers have had a 20-month period of sort of depressed activity since interest rates started rising in spring of 2022.
It's a long time.
Important to note, contract activity was up 5% in Manhattan December this year compared to last year, and 6% in Brooklyn, right? December is usually a quieter month, so it was down if you compare it to November, but it was up on the year, so that's important. As Vince mentioned, Elegant Forbes Global Properties puts out two index. We have the Consumer Sentiment Index and the Leverage Index, or Leverage Indicator, I should say. And what's important is they talk about, from a data perspective, what's happening in the market. So I'll mention that real quick, and then I'll talk about boots on the ground truth. So the Consumer Sentiment Index has, for much of this past year, hovered around parity. And what I mean by parity, I mean the pre-COVID average. It's a seasonally adjusted index. So the scores, a zero score to represent basically a seasonally adjusted pre-COVID average. Anything above would be above, anything below would be below. So we've seen this sort of accelerate a bit as we head into the new year, which is encouraging. And then our leverage indicator takes into basically 4 metrics: supply, demand, price change, and discounts, and talks about who has that power. It's been a tug of war, but it's not an equilibrium per se. It shows it as being a neutral market, which in some ways it feels, but at the end of the day, the boots on the ground buyers really have the upper hand if the property's been on for more than, let's call it, 90 days. Properties on the market for 30, 45 days that are priced correctly, it's still a seller's market. Anything that goes beyond that, it's a buyer's market. So that goes back to setting the stage that buyers have a lot of power if they know how to hunt correctly for the right property.
Now, we understand that, buyers are waiting for inventory, and it's true. How do we get the sellers to start seriously consider? I mean, like I said at the start, before the show started, I had a seller going on the market either this week or next week who called me yesterday and said, I don't think so. I think we're going to wait one more year. And I'm thinking, okay, how many times did I hear that last year?
Election year.
And it's an election year, so it's like, whatever. But how are we going to release more inventory? Jared and I were talking about this before the show also. In the suburbs, the inventory is a little better than here, but when something is on the market, it's flying off the market. The market is robust and active and rolling along. New York City, it's not. We also have a problem with buyers also think, well, if I buy right now, the prices are going to come down and I'm going to take advantage of the prices coming down. And I'm afraid if I buy something now, after I close, they're going to be 10% less. I mean, I could write a book on how many times I've heard that in 22 years that I'm in the business, right? What do we do with this? I mean, how do we fix this?
You can't day trade Manhattan real estate or
No,
any real estate.
you can't.
The best you can pinpoint is the 6-month window, right? So that's number one. Number two, you go back to the data. I mean, Urban Digs, John and Noah put out a great thing this past week. 5 charts to send to every buyer now. Great piece. It shows how we're at hopefully, the end innings of this really buyer favorable market. No one expected prices to stay stable or go up as interest rates rose. That was a shock, but I do not see a world in which prices actually decline when interest rates drop. Because when interest rates drop, it's going to, create more inventory, but that inventory is also going to come with it another corresponding unit of be a buyer, right? And you're going to have new buyers sidelines. So
Correct.
This is the time to purchase, to be able to negotiate, to be able to get it. And you can always refi later. Marry the home, date the rate.
Well, buyers will still sit back and say, well, but I start with it, because I agree with you 100%. I still have to start with it, and they may miss the boat. But I buyers to understand, intellectually, that prices to plummet. They're just not going to point. It would have happened long, but it didn't happen. We corrected it.
And the fact that we have co-ops and we have vigorous financial colonoscopy and vigorous down payments that people are paying. This is not 0.5% down FHA mortgage and thin equity in it. These people have equity in their home, and they're not going to be willing to take a loss on pain, and that doesn't thankfully in our market at scale.
Correct me if I'm wrong, that the refi business slowly kick in a little bit more. So I'm going to have a banker on you the next after to talk about that refi business. In my head, in my mind, all the is kind of an indication as to where the is, right? Markets, the rates get a better rate. Buildings refi their underlying mortgages, and they get so that kind of stalled. Interest rate dilemma started, but I read, I think it was end of last. That seems to be kicking in. Have you heard anything about that at all?
Only would be, it advise anyone that bought in the last 20 months, but I don't know if it's big enough yet for it to make sense.
That The difference is not big enough.
Yeah.
If they're at % or 6 something or 8, what, it's not that much of a
Yeah.
difference. And refi, when you can wait a little longer,
Unless they were on an adjustment, they're going
Well,
to
that's-
refi
Exactly.
into a long-term.
well, here's a question for you. What happens to these people who are on the adjustment, paying, fantastic, for 5 years, 7 years, whatever their program is, and now all of a sudden they're getting to that way higher interest when they go to a
Huge jump,
30-year
yeah.
fix.
They're
Huge
crying
jump.
That's
But are they selling?
One of my clients, yes, they are, because commiserate with the increase of what their monthly expense.
That's
And so they've had to of buying in that had abnormally high monthly, artificially suppressed. Now that they're going mortgage, which this is normal mortgage rates, they can no longer co-op, right? So now they're having to just maintain par.
it really normal mortgage rates, and they are. Absolutely are. That's the perfect word for it. On this program for many years. My best had bought a couple of apartments, and I the street. I'm not going to tell you how many years ago. % fixed, 30-year, and I just robbed the bank. Down from 19, down from
Haven't
11.
refied it since.
Right. Apartment didn't have time to refi. But the bottom line, fix, and I was cheering on 72nd Street. Amazing. What a great mortgage rate. Normal, okay? 6%.
It's an acclimation period.
It's,
Period for people to know that it's not going to go back,
no.
and it's still okay. I had the same a condo investment property, and I'm like, oh my god.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, but I thought I robbed the bank.
And, a lot of times with contrast like that, unfortunately, if the context for that contrast,
Exactly.
No.
so you can say
No.
to someone, hey, when, and it, as a reference point for contrast, and it doesn't land with them because they don't understand it. Now, to all of our points, rates go down, what they will understand is % versus 6%. That contrast, and whether that's enough for them to say, I understand the opportunity, even though they passed on that same % rate on the way up, now they 8 and 6 and they're ready to go. And that's where the contrast that has to be in, at least to see that difference.
Yeah, it's in losses, right? Someone that could have bought a right, they would look at it as losing it. To your point, they look like now they're winning. It's how much you feel gain versus pain.
It's your head on that pillow at night, whether you're first time buying, what you got as an interest rate, what the interest rate went down to or increased to. If you put your head on the pillow at night and you can fall asleep and say, I did okay,
Yeah.
based on the current, circumstances, that's all that matters. We are out of time. Thank you all for being here on set with me today. You know I love all of you. We'll be right back with my thoughts for the week right after these messages. Don't go away. Okay, everybody, we're back. My thoughts for this week. Negotiations in the luxury and non-luxury real estate markets exhibit stark differences reflective of their unique characteristics. In the luxury sector, negotiations are characterized by significantly higher financials, often involving multi-million-dollar properties with exclusive features. The luxury market is influenced by prestige, privacy, and personal relationships, and transactions may take longer due to the customized nature of these high-end properties. Emotions play a substantial role in luxury negotiations and in all negotiations, as buyers are often driven by lifestyle preferences and a desire for exclusivity. On the other hand, non-luxury negotiations are typically more transactional based with lower financial stakes and focus on meeting practical housing needs. These negotiations move more swiftly, driven by broader economic factors and the need for affordable housing solutions. While both luxury and non-luxury negotiations share fundamental principles, the distinct characteristics of each market necessitates different approaches, strategies, and considerations in navigating successful real estate transactions. And that's our broadcast for today. Thank you to my guests for being here on set with me. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, or TikTok at Vince Rocco, or my website, thinkvince.com. In addition, if you want to email me here at the show, you now can at talkingnyc@bhsusa.com. And Norman Vincent Peale says, and this is for my buddy over here, shoot for the moon, everyone. Even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. Once again, thanks to my viewers and my listeners around the world. We will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.